that the awareness and the ego are the same thing, but it kind of gets interpreted just automatically as being like it's the awareness part which is the important part. The awareness is the nothingness. You can't experience it. If you was to just go into a state of pure awareness, based on the definitions that we're kind of giving it, it wouldn't be able to have any experiences, because experiences can only be had in the context of the ego. When we were talking about the ego and the underlying awareness, when we was doing our kind of introduction to what is awareness and consciousness, we said you've got the awareness and then the ego, and they're separate, and it's like the awareness part that you have to get into. Non-duality is saying, well, actually, we take that back. They're not separate. They're the same thing. The awareness is the kind of, it's not dual, that's the point, right? Non-dual. So it's saying it's not the one thing and a separate other thing. Everything is one thing. It's not just even saying that the awareness and the ego are the same thing. It's saying that everything's the same thing. What? What do you mean everything's the same thing? I mean like the tree and you are the same thing. There's an underlying oneness about everything, and that explains it. So with the illusion is that you're looking at something else and seeing it as a subject, an object, and you're the subject. There is no object and subject. That's just the illusion. And the truth is that because of that, the character of you, which you're considering to be the ego, is also not a real thing. Okay? There's no separation between that and the stuff around it, the stuff that you're looking at, and the ego separation and the internal thing. It's not all separate, it's one thing. And then you end up spending quite a lot of time explaining why there's no ego. But our definition of ego in the first place was kind of a bit loose anyway. Because when we first started talking about the ego, we started saying, yeah, the ego is the thing that's having the thoughts and having the experiences and feeling the feelings and those types of things. That then we're coming along and afterwards saying, actually no, the ego and the awareness is the same thing. Actually, when we first started, before we even asked the first meaning question, that would have been kind of where the common sense model of reality in the first place. It's like you hadn't had any external ideas or influences. You're a natural consciousness, like maybe here I am right now, standing in the woods with a natural consciousness, looking at my dog, looking around at the trees, thinking stuff in my head, recording it here for some reason as well. And just starting from nothing, there's thinking and looking and seeing, sort of things going on. Thinking, looking, seeing. And then you could say that I'm like strolling around here, I'm doing. But I'm just kind of putting lots of labels onto the little nuances of the overall experience. There's like being, just being. That's all you've got. And then like another person will come along and you'll experience them as a phenomena in the environment. The environment is the everything. It's just the isness of the current situation. Your current isness, like this is it. Oh, there's another person, but my current isness is my current isness. You haven't started yet saying, well, there's something in the background, and this isness is a separate thing with its own drives, and it's independent from the environment. You haven't got to that point. It's like saying, am I separate from that? You have to actually start saying, am I separate from that, before you would, make that separation. So you've got this isness. The other person comes along, and because you've got your isness, you kind of assume, they've got their own isness as well. But they're like, they're also in the woods here. So their isness and my isness is both in the woods, and the woods is the background thing that's like common. But probably they've got the same isness as me, but they can remember different stuff because they've had different experiences of it. Look at the animals, they're going to have had the same situation. So now we're saying, okay, we've got the background reality and these multiple isnesses on top of that. The isnesses also appear to be biological creatures, humans and animals. They've each got their own experience within. Now for the animals, we don't know if that experience is just like an extension of a plant that when it starts getting eaten, it releases some toxins into its stem so that it like poisons the thing that's eating it. You've got this kind of mechanism that's aware of its environment. Because it's aware of its environment, it does a response. And then you could kind of cascade that idea all the way to a more sophisticated version of awareness, like a dog. It's just a kind of fundamentally aware of his environment in order for his biological needs to be met, like reproduction and feeding and all that stuff. And then humans got the additional need on that, was that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Humans have got additional needs on top of the spiritual need. Does that mean that the human thing we're just a biological response mechanism, and what we're calling ourselves as consciousness, what we're telling ourselves is this consciousness, magical consciousness, is just the biological mechanism of observing your environment for mating and survival purposes, and taking an automatic action based on the circumstances? Is that what happened? That got developed, and we've just kind of said, yeah, that is the consciousness. That is the ego. Or from the meaning, yes, God, yes question, then that would be that thing that's having the animal environmental scanning system is your soul. Or in spirituality, it's your it's not your ego as such, but yeah, it would be kind of like your ego. It's the thing that's scanning the environment and making choices. But the more sophisticated stuff, not just the avoiding treading on a thorn, which kind of happens subconsciously, but like, how do you make decisions about your life? Moral questions, moral decisions, stuff like that. Yeah, so getting back to the non-duality thing, it's saying, yeah, it's not dual after all. It's an illusion. So even though in your fundamental consciousness you're observing the environment, and then you do stuff based on that, and you're feeling like an individual within it, it's saying you're not an individual within it. That individual within it is an illusion. The truth is the kind of background reality. I think, is it the Brahman? I think I've got the wrong word. Yeah, it's the universal self, the true self, is the real reality. But there you're kind of got to be careful. Well, at least I had to be careful, because then we're saying, it's not that the ego and the universal consciousness are separate. It's that there is only the universal consciousness. So, like, you have the more it's just going back to the normal spirituality. The more connected you are to that, like the more spiritual you are, the more enlightened you are. But actually, if you're saying there is no duality, then that same thing applies about where you said there's not separate ego and universal awareness, there's only universal awareness, you can switch it over and say, well, it's non-duality, so if there's no separate ego and universal awareness, there's only ego, you could say. Because you're saying it's non-dual, right? So you're saying that, in a sense, the awareness is the ego. The awareness is just the mechanism to make the ego function. You can't have ego without awareness, they're saying. They're saying you can only have awareness without ego. But if it's non-dual, it should be true in both directions. So you could say you can have ego without awareness. Because it's fundamental. The ego requires awareness, and vice versa. If the ego tried to exist without the awareness, it wouldn't have that self-reflecting mechanism in order to be able to function as an ego. And if the awareness just existed without the ego, there's nothing to be aware of. It would be a nothingness. And I'm fairly sure that the texts do say it like this, which is kind of where this whole thing leads to, actually. I'm fairly sure that the texts do say it like this, that the awareness and the ego are the same thing, but it kind of gets interpreted just automatically as being like it's the awareness part which is the important part. The awareness is the nothingness. You can't experience it, I think, is what we're getting towards here. If you was to just go into a state of pure awareness, based on the definitions that we're kind of giving it, it wouldn't be able to have any experiences, because experiences can only be had in the context of the ego.